my name is Adam Driscoll, and today I'm going to be talking about creating web-based tools with PowerShell Universal. So what are we going to be doing here today? We are going to go through a quick PowerShell Universal overview. I have just a couple slides. I mostly want to do demos. I'm going to try to get to all of them. I made too many. And we are going to create some REST APIs with PowerShell. We're going to do some automation stuff. I don't actually have a schedule, but we'll set up some scripts and we can see what that looks like. And then we're going to be building a UI kind of around those APIs and that script. So what is PowerShell Universal? It kind of has three major feature groups. APIs for like REST APIs. Automation, which are scripts, and we have in-browser terminals, schedules, that kind of thing. And then user interfaces. So we have a couple different ways to actually make user interfaces. I'll be showing off mostly the page designer today, but we also have Universal Dashboard integrated in here as well. Today I'm going to be showing off the PowerShell Universal v3 beta. So we have some new stuff. Some of this is actually in v2, later versions of v2, but some of this is coming in v3. Like we've made some improvements to the APIs around multiple environments and methods per endpoint. We have added SQL Server support, which is kind of the big feature for v3, which means you can kind of scale out your job runners and that kind of thing, and have high availability PowerShell Universal instances. And then some tweaks to the user interface with new controls. We've upgraded our UI library for dashboards and that kind of thing. All right, so this is what we're going to be building today. A Magic the Gathering card search, random card, card stats, and life counter. So I felt like, we'll keep it light on the last day here. So yeah, that's what we're going to get into right now. Success. All right. So if you don't know what Magic the Gathering is, it is actually a card game. And it has been around since like the early 90s. And there are a lot of cards. So it's kind of got a passionate following. So what's cool is someone has gone ahead and created an API for Magic the Gathering called Scryfall. And it has all kinds of endpoints for cards and sets and that kind of thing. And we can consume that in PowerShell using invoke REST method. And then they have images and all kinds of stuff. We're going to be very lightly touching this API, but it's going to give us all kinds of cool stuff to show inside PowerShell Universal. So let's get into PowerShell Universal. This is kind of just more or less a pretty clean install. There's not too much in here. And I'm going to log in. And this is kind of where, on the left-hand side, you'll see our kind of feature groups, APIs, automation, user interfaces, platform settings, and just general settings, as well as security settings. So the most important thing that we have to do first is set up some branding, because it's always important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a published folder, which means I'm going to take a local file path and publish it as an HTTP endpoint, more or less. I have some of this here, so I don't have to type it all out. And I will take this local file path, and I'm going to set the request path. That's kind of the path that you go to actually access this, to images. And now, if I were to go to images / logo.png, it's not going to find it for some reason. Oh, I had a typo. Images, logo.png. There we go. Okay. So now it's taking that local file on disk and serving it over HTTP. So anything in that folder will show up in this way. I think I also have a JPEG here for a little smaller. Yeah, there you go. All right, so if we go back to Universal, I'm going to change a couple settings in here. We're going to call this Magic Gathering, and we want to do images / logo.jpg. And if we save that, reload it, and now we've branded it Magic the Gathering. The other place that you can actually do that is in our login page. If we did images / logo.png, actually I think I'll pop that up. Images / logo.png, save that. Let's see if that works. So there's that image, and now when I log out, rather than PowerShell Universal, it says Magic the Gathering. So it's kind of funny how important that is to people. So, yeah, so now we have our Magic the Gathering PowerShell Universal instance branded. Very important. All right, so now let's look at creating an API. So the first API I'm going to create is going to be a random. Well, before that, I actually want to, let's put a variable in for the Scrifall API so I don't have to keep defining it over and over again. So if we go to Platform, Variables, I'm going to create a new variable. I'm going to call it Scrifall API, and I have that in here. So it's just api.scrifall.com. And now that I define this variable in here, not in the description though, I did that actually when I was practicing this. Now that I have that API defined in that variable, I can use that variable anywhere inside PowerShell Universal. That's just like a regular PowerShell variable. So let's go to endpoints. I am going to make a random, let's see, yeah, random card endpoint. And we'll just turn off authentication, create that, and go to the edit details. And now you can see I just have an editor where I can put PowerShell script. And this is the API that's going to get called to actually execute this PowerShell script. So, again, I have this saved here. Oops, I don't want to learn more about my own product. All right, so I'll go through this code, but I just want to type it all. All right, so I have a random card, and I'm calling the Scrifall API, calling card/random. So it's just going to give me a random card in Magic the Gathering game. From there, I don't want to like return the whole like card data, so I'm just going to return a couple things like the name, type, set, the image URL, the text, and the flavor text. So if we save that, and we actually execute it in here. So you can see it went out to Scrifall, and we have some information there. But what's really cool is that I actually copy this like invoke REST method call, pop that open, and I put that in my terminal, execute it. You can see that it went out and ran my PowerShell script inside PowerShell Universal and actually returned an object back because it was formatted as JSON. So you could actually pick stuff out of it. All right, so now let's make a little UI over that. If we go to, come on, mouse. If we go to Pages, we can create a new page. I'm just going to call this one random. And we won't worry about the URL. You can change the URL, put a description on it and stuff. And if we actually view that page, you kind of see something like this. So this is just blank page, nothing too interesting. Looks kind of like the admin console, except that it just has the pages. But if you click edit, that's where it gets kind of fun. So we have properties for the page, a toolbox, and then variables that show up in the page. So since we want to display our random card here, what we want to do is kind of load some data when this page loads. So I can select my API and get my random card API in here. So if I just click that, save it, save that, it's going to reload the page. And now when I look at the variables, you're going to see that it actually loaded up the variables from that API. So now I have like the image, I have the card name, type, that kind of thing. So what's cool about that is then I can start adding controls to my page. So I'm going to add an alert at the top. It's just kind of a little box that you can kind of color depending on what you want to show. And rather than having the message in here, I can put the name of the card. So now we have Raging Minotaur in there. But obviously we want to display the card itself. So we can put our $image into that URL there, and now we have the actual card itself. And let's do one more. We will put in a, whoops, I want text. So I'm going to put in some text. And I gotta look at the variable again. I don't remember what it is. I think it's just text. Okay. So then we can just replace this text with $text, and boom. So what's cool about those variables is you can use them in like any one of the fields that like accepts text. So I'll show you in a little bit how we're going to put it into a URL to dynamically update the page based on things that we click and that kind of stuff. All right, so there's our page, and we save it. And a user of this page that's not an administrator just wouldn't have that edit button, and it would look like this. And if you were to actually resize this and kind of lay things out differently in smaller screen sizes, it'll automatically adapt based on the screen size. So now when I reload this, it's just going to get a new random, hit Scrifall appropriately, a new random card every time I reload it. All right, so now let's look at a script and how to actually take some user input and produce something based on that. So I'm going to create a new script. I'm just going to call it card search and create that. So the idea with scripts is it's just, unlike APIs are kind of designed for speed. You can kind of think of it more like an Azure function than kind of a task scheduler kind of thing. This is more of a task scheduler kind of thing, but we do integrate with the PowerShell host pretty tightly. So we'll actually look at the param block and create a form based on that. If you have write progress in there, it'll show up in here. If you have read host, it'll actually wait for the user to enter something. So yeah, it's like tightly coupled with the PowerShell host. So I'm going to grab my script sample here, and I will go through this. It's a little bigger. All right, so at the top is a param block. We have 3 parameters. I have a card name that I want to search for, the format to return it in, and then whether or not we want to, make it pretty. So if you were going to display the JSON or something like that, you'd probably have that pretty flag at the bottom. Then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cache this because Scrifall doesn't want you to call it more than 10 times a second. So if this was a busy API, I could cache it. And if it's in the cache, I'm just going to return the card based on that card name. Then I'm calling the invoke REST method again on Scrifall, the card/search REST API now, and passing in the card name, the format, and whether or not to make it pretty. And then I'm doing the same thing, or similar thing that I was doing with the random, where I'm putting in the name type set and a link. And you'll see what that link does in a little bit. It's something we added in v3. All right, so if I were to actually save this and run it, and you can see it automatically looked at the param block, and now I have things I can enter. I can choose other environments to run it in. So if I wanted to run it in 7.2 or Windows PowerShell, the integrated environment actually runs it directly inside the PowerShell Universal server. And then if you specify run as credentials, you could elevate it to another account. So let's search for some dragons. Click OK there. So now it's going out to Scrifall, and on the left-hand side, you'll see kind of the standard output that you would see inside your PowerShell terminal. And then on the right-hand side, we actually capture the pipeline output, so you can actually use it later. So as you can see here, I have a hash table, or a bunch of hash tables really, with different dragons that were returned from the Scrifall API. And what's cool is you can then consume these. It's it uses the CLI XML to serialize all this, and you can consume these objects in other scripts later, sort of thing. So we actually store that all in the database. All right, now that we have that, we're going to create a page around that script. So I am going to go here. I am going to say card search. Let's turn off authentication. I have a card search page. And now when I click view, you'll see that both random and card search show up on the left-hand side there. And this page is blank, but if I went to random, it would still show my random page, and then go back to card search. So what we're going to add here is a form. So forms can be used to call APIs or scripts. I am going to make this the card search form. Card search. Whoop. Oh, wow. Search Scrifall for cards. Okay. And we have some options, you can reset it if you want it to show progress or output while the script is running. Then you need to specify a target. I want to run my card search script. And then I'm going to put just the one field in, which is card name. We're not going to worry about making it pretty or what format to return it in, that kind of thing. I want this to be a text box, and it is required. And then I'm going to customize the icon, which is very important. And we're going to say search instead of save. Okay, so let's try that. Oh, one thing I forgot to do. I want to change the result type. By default, it's none, which means it'll just say, like, success, you submitted this form. Text will actually return the text of that PowerShell script that ran or the API that ran. And then a table will actually look at the object that was returned and generate a table based on that. So I'll save that, save this, reloads it. Now let's try our dragon again. All right, so it actually went out, called Scryfall, returned the dragons, and you can see that my type, set, name, and value are there. And that value is actually that nested hash table that defined a link. So since I said like type link and the URL and then the text for the link, it generated the link for me. And that doesn't go anywhere right now. So I just get a 404 there. But I want to take it to the next step and actually make that link go somewhere. So we're going to create another API. I will create slash, I gotta make sure this is the right one, because I need to get, well, let me think about this. This is card, no, that's the link I'm generating here, card. So I will just do slash cards slash colon ID. You might not be able to see that very well, but I put a colon in front of the ID, and that makes this route dynamic. So you can put anything in that ID part of the route, and it will show up inside your API. So I'm going to say, okay, we're going to turn off this, and we're going to go like this. And now, again, I'm going to go and grab this so we don't have to type it all. And this is going to be very similar to the random one, except that we're passing it an ID rather than calling it a random endpoint. So in this example, I have a param block at the top, and it's going to automatically bind that dynamic route parameter to this ID. So, and then from there, I'm doing the caching again. I'm calling a Scryfall API with the ID of that card, and then I'm returning the same data that I was returning in the random card search thing. So then we're caching it. So let's save that. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to produce a page for specific cards. So we can do the same thing that we did with the API, where we can go, this is just going to be like card. The URL is going to be card /: ID. So almost exactly like we did with the API, we can make this have a variable in it. All right, so I'm going to click OK here. And we're going to go view that. And now I have a card page. And what you're going to see in here is that we have additional route variable in my variables window. So it says ID is the ID, and that comes from the route. So if I were to put a different ID in here, like if I just put something random, like, now when I look at that variable, you can see that it's changed because the route changed. So I can use that in my UI. So let's actually go ahead and I am going to add an image, and I think I can just do, oh wait, before this, I want to load the API for my cards, because I need the data for the cards. So when the page loads, I want to call this API, but I want it to be dynamic based on the route that you go to. So I'm going to do cards /ID. I gotta make sure. I know we have a bug right now where it's it is case sensitive. It's like, why isn't this working? All right, so we save that. It's going to reload the page, and what we're actually going to see is that it's not going to work right away because there's probably no card with this ID, so it's like returning an error. We actually looked at that. So let's try. Oops, I want to do this. Sorry, I had a little big here. All right, what I do want to do is put an image in there, and we're going to just do $image because that's coming from that REST API that I called. It's one of the properties on there. And you can see that it didn't work because it doesn't know what $images in this context. That variable doesn't exist. But if I go to card search, now I should be able to do drag in. And if you look at the URL to this, you probably can't see it, but it's pointing to the card page that I just created, and it has the ID of that card. So if I click that, you can see that it actually loads that specific card into that page. So one thing to note is like the card now shows up here in the navigation, but you really don't want it there because like it's not going to specify an ID. So if you go to the card page, you can actually hide dynamic pages like this from navigation. So just turn off show in navigation, and that card page will no longer show up in there. So if I were to click off here, you wouldn't see that. So now we have a form that we're creating. It's going out to Scryfall based on user input. It's generating that table, and then from there we actually have like another step where we can actually drill into something. So, you know, if in a business sense, you might have like a VM search or a user search, and then you would click the info button on that VM or that user, and then you would see all the information about them. And we could put more forms on here to take additional action and that kind of thing. All right, so I want to show off one more thing with pages, and I'm going to actually update my my random API to be a little more not robust, but it's going to take some more statistics. So let's make this a little smaller. So we're getting a random card, but I actually want to like track some information about the random card that I'm getting. So I have an endpoint here that this is actually going to get that random card and collect some statistics and then kind of store those in the cache. You can store them wherever you want, but I'm just storing them in the cache about the random card. So now we get the random card. If we don't have stats yet, I'm going to create a new hash table that has colors and sets. From there, I'm going to add the card set to there. If it's new, I'll add it. If it's already in there, I won't. And then I'm going to bump the color count up, sort of thing. So then we're going to store that in the cache and return the random card as we were before. So from like a usage perspective, it should work the same way. I'm just getting random cards out of here. But what that allows us to do is we can actually consume those stats and display them on a page. So I'm actually going to create two new endpoints in here. One thing I might want to try, I didn't try this before, but I'm going to see if this works. So if you've never used PowerShell Universal before, everything that we are doing is actually stored as PowerShell scripts. So one thing we added in v3 is this like repository editor. So everything we've been doing has been generating PS1 scripts in the background. So there's my PowerShell script. You can see my images are in here. My pages are in here. And we have this .universal folder, which has like a bunch of configuration stuff. So if you actually looked at like the endpoints file, you'd see that we have new PSU endpoint and all that kind of thing. So I should be able to just do this. Probably won't work, and then I'll be like, oh no. All right, so I've saved my my endpoints.ps1 file that contains these new endpoints. And these endpoints, one returns colors, and then one returns the sets. So if we go to API, hopefully, it just automatically picks that up. So now I have stats and colors and that kind of thing. So yeah, we have like a Git integration that will actually pull down files into a PowerShell Universal instance. So you can kind of like synchronize all your PowerShell Universal instances and drive it via code. So there's like, you know, the single source of truth are those PS1 files for the configuration. All right, so now I have two new endpoints. I have this like colors endpoint, and if I execute that, you can see that since I ran that random API a couple times, it generated a couple of color values. I got 2 greens and 1 blue, I think. And if I go back and do the card sets API and run that, you'll see that I have a list of sets that those cards came from. So it was 3 different sets. So I'm going to make a stats page for this. Pages. call it stats. Turn off this, and we are going to update this stats page. All right, so we have controls for charts, and I think like a pie chart makes sense for colors. So plop a pie chart on there. The angle field and the color field, so the angle is like how large the pie slice is. I think that was value. And then the color field, in this case, is color. So it's going to be funny because the colors won't match. But we'll put API, and we will select our color API and save that. And now we have this chart that is actually dynamically reading from that API to display those values we saw that it was returning. Save that. And then if we go to our random thing now and go back, you can see that it's like dynamically updating that, because every time we hit the random, it updates that cache and our statistics change. So the other thing we can do is display like our sets. So we have that other stats endpoint to display sets. So I'm going to put this table in here, and I'll make that a little bigger. And I am going to say this is sets. Data source, we're going to set as the API, and we're going to load it from sets. And we have one single column in there, which is it's a basic column, and it's name. Oops, namin'. And we can make it sortable, sure. And if you save that, you can see those are all the sets that those cards came from. So if I save this, that's kind of how it would look to an end user without the edit button. And again, if we go to random and stats, random and stats, it's updating both the table, pie chart thingy, and the list of sets. All right, so now I want to show some integration into a universal dashboard. So that's kind of how PowerShell Universal started. It was Universal Dashboard. It was a PowerShell script or module that did all this without the fancy admin console or anything. And we actually still support that. So you can still build web pages using Universal Dashboard inside of PowerShell Universal. So I'm going to create a new dashboard. I'm just going to call it Life Counter. And similar to like scripts and like schedules and stuff like that, you can run it as multiple environments, PowerShell 7 or Windows PowerShell, different accounts, and that kind of thing. We also have like role-based access and everything for dashboards too. So when you first create a dashboard, what you're going to see is like this demo dashboard. This is where we actually upgraded our. We upgraded this to the latest version of Material UI, which is version 5. And as you can see, we have a little work to do. This is our beta. You can see the stylings a little bit, but it does support you know, diagram light themes out of the box, and you can create like really custom UIs with you know, this PowerShell module. And if we look at how that's made, you'll see that it actually has its own set of commandlets. So we have new UD dashboard, new UD row, new UD column, new UD card, forms. And the way you build a form in Universal Dashboard is you're actually defining all the parameters for that form. And yeah, then you have an on submit. So it's similar to like in some ways to like Windows Forms, where you have like these events get fired when certain things happen. You can update controls and stuff. So it's a lot more dynamic than the Pages feature we have, but it also has a learning curve. Obviously, you have to learn the whole Universal Dashboard module. But we have a bunch of examples online, and the forums are good ways to learn that. But I am going to grab a dashboard that I made for this, and we'll kind of step through how this works. And then, oops, put an A in there. And then we'll see it in action. So I created a new dashboard called Life Counter. And what it's doing is it has a single page called Home. It checks to see if there's a cache of players yet. If not, it creates a new list of players. From there, it has a dynamic. And a dynamic is used for like refreshing certain parts of a page. So I'll show you how we do that in a sec. We have two special scopes inside Universal Dashboard. One is the cache scope. That's for all people that visit the website. You can cache data in there, and it'll be really fast. You can avoid calling out to your scripts and APIs. And then we also have the session scope. So that is actually variables that you want just for this user. So I'll show you how that works with an incognito window here in a sec. So I have a form with a single text box to get the name of the user. And then from there, what I'm doing is I'm storing that player's name in their session. I'm calling sync UD element, which causes this dynamic to reload automatically. So we're using WebSockets and everything like that to tell the browser to reload. And we're doing a broadcast, so any user that is on that page will reload. So this is useful for you're collecting data somehow, and you want to update a whole bunch of users that are connected to this dashboard. You would do something like that. You'd broadcast, and all the charts would update, or all the tables would update. From there, I am adding the user to the cache of players. So I'm taking their name and their life total and putting it in there. All right, and then I have a button to create a new game. Pretty much what that does when you click it is it wipes out the players, it kills the session name for the current user, and then it reloads the page. And then finally, we have a table that has all the players in it. So the first column is a player column, just with their name. And then the second column is actually their life total, but it's made out of 3 different components. So I have a stack, which just kind of allows you to stack things next to each other or on top of each other. And then a button that reduces the player's life or increases the player's life, depending who you're clicking on there. And then in the middle of those buttons is just a display of their life, sort of thing. So some cool things, if you didn't notice that, it'll actually reload the page automatically when you make changes. So you can kind of quickly develop on this. So I'll put my name in here. I actually turned on, I made this a blank page, which means it gets rid of the header and all that kind of stuff. And I'll put Adam in there. And now you can see that Adam is listed in here and my life total is 20. So I can reduce my life total by clicking this. And if I were to open an incognito window that doesn't share the same cookie as my current browser, I can go and navigate to the life counter homepage. And you'll see this user is getting asked for their username because you don't have it stored in their session. So put Bill in there. And now what you'll notice is Adam and Bill showed up in this browser, but Adam and Bill also showed up in the other browser. So it's actually using WebSockets to communicate to both browsers. And if you increment the life total, you'll see it's happening in both places. So effectively, these could be on 2 different remote machines, wherever. All right, so I would say 80% of the people that use PowerShell Universal are building really crazy dashboards with this. So there are, we have hundreds of controls now because of the extensibility of it. You can actually create your own PowerShell modules that use your own React controls and load them up in there. I think we have something like 60 that are built in the box, including charts and text and layout things, all kinds of stuff. But we have docs for all that. All right, so the one thing I wanted to show is how to integrate this with a page. So it's not a super elegant solution, but if you actually use a blank dashboard like I did, where it doesn't have a header or anything, you can actually embed it into a page using an iframe. And I'll show you what that looks like. So if I were to do, what am I looking for here? Is it data display? Yeah. I can use an iframe, and I want to set the URL to, I think it was /lifecounter. Save that, and now my life counter control thing is actually embedded in my page. So you can kind of centralize everything into your page that way. You can see it has this little weird flicker when it loads and that kind of thing, but it kind of allows you to integrate both your really complex controls, like the one we built in Universal Dashboard, into a simpler page layout that you can actually drag and drop here. So kind of where we're headed with this is hopefully making it a little more integrated with Universal Dashboard. So you could have your drag and drop experience, but you could also build your components that are like really complicated, like this particular one, with the universal dashboard module. And then eventually they'll just kind of end up in your toolbox. So that's kind of where we're headed. But there's nothing stopping you from just not using the page designer at all and just building dashboards yourself too. All right, so let's cancel out here. And let's make sure that was the last thing I wanted to get to. All right, so I do want to show off the repository a little bit more just to provide some more context. So everything in PowerShell Universal is a PowerShell script except for pages. Those are stored as XML files, but it's still version controllable. And we are just kind of generating this XML, and that's what generates that page. The idea being that there's nothing really executable in the page itself. It's just calling your endpoints and scripts. And then you saw me configure some other things like the login page. There's where I set that image. The publish folder shows up in there. We have a manifest of scripts, so it won't just like pick up your scripts. You can put them into this kind of manifest file, and that allows you to configure additional things like error action, info action, the location of the script if it's in a folder or not, whether to run it as another user, that kind of thing, and also variables show up in here. So we do have secret management support where we actually integrate with Microsoft Secret Management module. If you guys sat through that session, it will actually store them in the vault that you have configured, that kind of thing. All right, and I think that I got through that much faster than I was planning. All right, well, thank you for coming to my session, and find me if you ever want to look at some of this or chat about anything. So, thank you.